Good afternoon everyone, my name is Dave Mobbs from X-Rite Photo Europe and I'd like to welcome you to our latest webinar, Lightroom Tips and Tricks with Adobe Principle Solutions Consultant Richard Curtis. We'll be collecting questions throughout the webinar and address these at the end, but unfortunately due to time we can't answer all of the questions. Please use the questions box provided and we'll take a selection of questions for Richard. Before Richard gets underway, let me give you a quick introduction. So Richard Curtis is a Principal Solutions Consultant at Adobe and is focused on the digital imaging solutions in the UK, which are Lightroom and Photoshop. Richard is also a photographer with an interest in street, travel and landscape photography and has been making images for over 20 years. Richard will also be joined by Andrei Szkorupinski from X-Rite Photo Europe, who will be discussing colour workflow with a colour checker passport. So I'll pass you on to Richard now. I will just change presenter. Richard will be with us in 1 second.
Perfect. Hi guys, I hope you're well and enjoying your day so far. As Dave said, I'm Richard Curtis from Adobe, work here in the UK. And what we're here really to do today is just to go through Adobe Lightroom and some tips and tricks. You can reach out to me on Twitter as always, and I'm going to leave you some takeaways at the end of the presentation as well. But just so you know what we're doing today, we're going to go through Lightroom. But what I thought we'd do is go through Lightroom 4, Lightroom 5, and Lightroom 6. And just show you some tips and tricks from all the different versions, because there is some great features in those versions to enable you to get your photographs looking amazing. Then we're going to cover some of the Lightroom mobile elements and how Lightroom mobile works inside Lightroom 6 or Lightroom CC, actually, as I should say now. And then go into something called Adobe Slate, which you may or may not be aware of. So let's do that just now. And there's questions as you type the questions in, we'll collate them and then we'll go through them a little bit later on. Okay, so I'm just going to launch Lightroom. Okay, so here's my Lightroom catalog. It's full of loads of pictures that I've collected and harvested off my main account. So I have multiple accounts running, and these are just my demo assets. But they are real assets mostly. They're either TIFFs or PSDs or RAW files from various cameras and manufacturers. So I kind of use different cameras throughout my my photographic experience. One of the first things I wanted to do today was to go through a really cool feature that is kind of the base for all of my workflow, and I think it's the base for most photographers' workflow. I just want to recap though, because it is a cool feature, and that's the shadow and highlight recovery that we modified and enhanced in Lightroom 4. And for that, I'm going to show this image here, which is of the Eiffel Tower. It's a pretty flat image, and if you look at the histogram, you can see that we're not actually clipping any data. And I know that because when I go into the development tab by clicking on the development module, and remember that Lightroom's organized in a way for photographers to really mimic their workflow. So libraries for managing their pictures and bringing their pictures in, and development is for working on the pictures as you would inside the physical darkroom that it used to be, back in the 80s and early 90s. So here we are back in the development module, and on my histogram over here in the right side of my screen, you can see these two little indicators, and when I hover over these, you can see that parts of the screen light up, and that's showing me what's clipping and what's not. If I press the J key will turn them both on, so I can now see my clipping indicators. So now I can see what's clipping. And for those that don't understand what clipping is, it's when the areas of the picture go into white, pure white or pure black in the shadows and white in the highlights. So you can see here that we're not clipping, but the image is really flat. So it's not clipping, which is great, but I want to do something with this to make it look better than what it is. It looks kind of dull. So what we're going to do is, and the basic for every single image that I go through in Lightroom is always through the basic panel. The basic panel just gets us where we need to be to work on our pictures even further. Now remember, Lightroom is designed to be a photographer's companion. So you don't have to use every single feature. although I would always go through the basic panel to make the adjustments. You're just trying to fix problems basically in the picture. That's how I look at photography and Lightroom. So here we have in the basic panel, we've got a couple of things we can do here. We've got white balances that we can check, and we can select and make different white balances. We can select them and hover that over the image, and you can see on the left-hand side of the navigator, as I hover over the image, that changes based upon the white balance values, and I can change that by clicking it, which just refines that white balance to where it needs to be, and we'll talk about that in a few more minutes. But what I want to focus on the highlights and the shadows. Now, we are using the current process version. The current process version contains all of the algorithms, if you like, for how Lightroom will work on those pictures. Now, the highlight slider, if I go negative, will pull all the highlights out of the image. And what we're going to do is reconstruct those highlight values from the RGB color channels. So, for example, if I pull the highlights back now, look what happens. I stretch out the highlights in the histogram and bring all that data back. So now it looks kind of moody. But if we look at the shadows, they're all kind of blocked up. So let's go to the shadows now and push those to the right, and look what happens. All that data from the image is now expanded into that histogram and gets our picture opened up so we can now start working on it. Now for me, that's a bit too much. So I'm going to dial the shadows back just to show a little bit of that structure underneath the avatar, because that's the most important piece for me. Just shows that complex architecture. I would then typically move into the whites and blacks. Whites and blacks are to reset where my white and black clipping indicators are going to be. So I do want to have the J key turned on, or at least the indicators turned on up here on the histogram. But what I can do here is just move my whites and blacks. And you can see as I do that, my white point and black point starts to move. And as soon as I get to the clipping of the red in the highlights, I'm going to back off the whites. I don't want to have my highlights clipped. However, for the blacks, I don't mind clipping blacks a little bit because it adds contrast and interest. I'm just going to dial that back so you can see there. I dial that back to -17, and it gives me that really nice contrasty look. I can turn the indicators off with the J key, and you can see I get a nice picture. If we look at the previous picture as a before and after, by clicking the before and after button down here, you can see we've made a huge difference by just looking at 4 sliders in Lightroom. And that was from Lightroom 4, which is a long time ago. Okay, the next thing I would do is work on the clarity and push the clarity up. That will give me some mid-tone contrast. We're not sharpening here, we're just adding mid-tone contrast. And that gives us that lovely lovely boost of contrast there. And you can see it really comes alive. So again, if I look at my before and after, look at the difference. Just with 5, 6 sliders, it's not a lot of difference. It's a huge difference. Okay, so that's that, and that's how I would pretty much do that, and I would leave it. And actually, I might go to black and white. It depends what I'm trying to do, but that's typically how I'd use those shadow highlight sliders, which are just amazing. And we can get your picture looking at an amazing level. The other tip and trick I was going to add is white balance. Now this is a very tricky image. You've got a mixed lighting condition, so you've got daylight outside over here, and you've got a tungsten light inside, which is really difficult to manage. And you know, once you've applied your Color Checker Passport data to this, you're still going to have this problem, because the Color Checker Passport corrects the color information from the camera, which is perfect and exactly what you need, but you still need to balance the picture out. So what you typically have to do is bring this into Photoshop and do some work on the white balance and tone it down. But in Lightroom, and from Lightroom 4, we're able to use something called the gradient filter. Now the gradient filter is just like a grad that you would use on the front of your camera out in the field. It's going to protect part of the image and do some work on another part of the image. In this case, we're going to do work on the tungsten light and bring that tungsten area down to daylight. So to do that, I'm going to pull in the gradient filter. If I turn the mask on, you can see where the mask is being applied, and that's the red lift that comes in. So I'll just turn that off. Now I've got my edit pins turned to auto. I'm going to keep them as auto, and I'll show you what it does in a few seconds. I'm just going to move back to my my development area here, and I'm just going to work on the temperature control. I've got manual temperature controls here, so I can manually change the temperature. And you can see as I do that, it rebalances the image out and it applies the temperature only to the areas that the gradient filter is applied to. You can see the show edit pins is now working. If I hover over the picture, I get the tool, which I can then move around and change the position of that to blend it into the scene. I can also rotate. This is Lightroom 6 or Lightroom CC that we're running now, which is much faster. So you're not going to have that any lagginess or anything like that on your computer because we're using the graphics processor by default to actually give that performance benefit. And the pins over here, which I was just talking about, as soon as I move out of the picture frame, they go away. So it means I can look at the edit without having to really remove in my mind the filters. I just get rid of that visual element, so I can pull in and go out very quickly and see what my adjustment was. So then I can refine it even further and get my image look even better, which is great. And that's something that photographers will always face, that kind of mixed lighting conditions, especially when you have those funny lights. So let's just whiz on to Lightroom 5. Lightroom 5 was an amazing release. It had some great features in it, and one of them was the advanced healing brush. Now, the healing brush has always been great. However, in Lightroom 4, you have the problem of that you can only have a disk. So, for example, in this scene that you can see on the left-hand side, you've got this area of concern, and for me, anything light or anything bright in the picture is going to grab my attention and potentially remove away from the real messaging of the actual image. So what I'm going to do is just move this into the development module and go and pick my clone heal tool. Okay, so my clone heal tool is now selected. You see it's pretty big, and I can just use my square bracket keys to dial that down. That might be a bit slow, so I can just manually move the size down, and you can see there that I get to do that pretty quickly. Now, I'm just going to change this new option feather and come back to that in a second. Let's go back to how it was in Lightroom 4. In Lightroom 4, we only had a disk. Okay, but when you only have a disk, you can only do a couple of things. When you apply the adjustment, you can find the area that you want to modify, and then select the area you want to modify it with. But the problem is, you get a really hard edge. So if I move out of the area and use those pins again, you can see the area here of where the clone heal is being fixed. So what we did in Lightroom 5 was we brought in the feather command. And the feather command can be used to actually dial down the feather or dial down or dial up of the feather of the clone destination and really blend this patch in. So now, just by changing that feather, you can't really see any change here. So it's a lovely way of doing that. So that was a fantastic upgrade with the feather command. Now also lends us into something like this. I can see my feather command on here, but maybe I want to get rid of the person in the scene because I decided that after I took the picture I'd rather have the landscape rather than the person walking through it. So in Lightroom 5 we added the advanced healing brush, which means that we can now paint a mask over the area and then blend another part of the scene in, again using my feather commands to dial that area in and out, so we get a really nice blend. There you go. You get a really nice blend. You can spend a bit more time on this and get it exactly where you want it to be, but it gives you a really nice way to do that. And of course, anytime you're working with the advanced healing brush or any of these types of things and adjustments in Lightroom, you can press the delete key and that will get rid of the adjustment that you've just made, so it's all non-linear, which is great. Now the other thing we did inside Lightroom 5 is add something called visualize spots. This essentially turns the image into a negative, and then you can see any anomalies. So if you have any dust spots from the sensor or anything like that in the picture, it's typically hard to see them. When you print those, you can definitely see them in the print, but you might not see them in the screen. Just because of the way the screen's backlit, you won't see that. But using the visualize spots, you're able to see very quickly what's going on and just get rid of any issues that you may have that you can't see on the normal image. So this is a nice way of just quickly checking to make sure you've got no dust spots or any issues. Recently, I've been doing a lot of scanning from 1993, and I've been getting some hairs and hair marks and scratches. This has been invaluable to kind of really get to the nub of that problem and really fix them very, very quickly without going through the pain later and wasting print and wasting ink costs, which of course you may be facing if you're doing it yourself. Another great feature was the upright feature we put in Lightroom 5. Sometimes you get a picture like this which is a little bit wonky, and of course you can fix this in Lightroom using the measure tool to place an arbitrary measure on the image, or you could use Photoshop and use its lens correction or adaptive wide angle from CS6. However, we brought in a feature inside Lightroom 5 called upright. And upright is a great, invaluable feature. Now, when you're working with upright, the objective of upright is to look at the horizontals and the verticals in the picture, and we'll try and fix them automatically for you. Okay, so the upright settings are here on the lens correction panel. Again, something I would always do on every single image is look at my lens corrections, and I'll talk about that in a second. But we have auto, level, vertical, and full. I'll talk about full in a little while and what it does. But what I would do always to my pictures is we've spent a considerable amount of time working with manufacturers and their lenses to remove any distortion or barrel distortion and vignetting around the edges of a picture. So companies like Leica, Hasselblad, Canon, and Nikon, they all have this issue in the lenses. And what we do is we can remove that by turning on the profile corrections, and it also removes any barrel distortion that you may have in the lens. So if I turn it on, you can see it makes a difference to the picture. Not a lot, but a big difference when it comes down to the flat or the squareness of the barrel distortion that you may have in the lens. So I always do that. It just gives me a nicer image to start working with. It removes that distortion on the edges. Now I can use the upright, and I feel more confident that my picture will be in a better shape without any barrel distortion to do that. So I'm going to use the auto, because auto is the fastest thing, and I want to make this picture look like, look great from that wonky scene. And I can push the auto. What the auto will do is automatically find the verticals and horizontals in an image and reframe that automatically for you. Of course, you can always go back to just manually level, or just a vertical, or just a full automatic. It's up to you what you'd like to do. If you go to something like this, which has got converging verticals and a wonky horizontal, it's a bit trickier using auto. You have to do something called a full 3D warp. So the full 3D warp is available on the full button, and what that will do is it will try and fix everything for you and give you that vertical in the way. Now you can see there that I've still got a bit of tilt towards the camera. So if I go to manual and modify the vertical tab, I can just very quickly put that back in, and you can see there that I've got a very nice, albeit slightly bent, but a very nice kind of finish, which is much better than the original value that I had, which is something like that. You can see we've pulled those pixels around. But be careful, because you are working with pixels and you are starting to stretch them using the full, so just be careful with that. One of the most powerful filters, I think, that came in Lightroom 5 was a radial filter. And the radial filter does a couple of things. One, it actually is more flexible than using something like a post-crop vignette, because the post-crop vignette comes from the center of the screen, center of the image, so you can't move it, where the radial filter you can. Now, why would you use it? Well, I use it on a lot of things now. I use it on portraits, and I use it on landscapes, because I want to pull out the story. Now, if you look at this picture on the screen, just move my panel to the left, look at this picture on the screen, you can see that we see the horses, but what happens is our eyes get attracted to those very bright areas. And you can see over here, this bright area is a main attraction, and for me, my eyes just see the horses and go to that empty plane, and I miss the whole story. Now, of course, if I go into the development module, I can go to my effects, and I can pull a highlight priority post-crop vignette in place. But you can see there, like I said before, it comes in from the outside and it's pinned to the center. So it does darken the edges and brings my brings my eye into the scene and creates me an edge burn, which was very popular in the 50s and the 60s when it comes down to printing, and I use edge burn all the time to bring images, make weaker images much stronger, and you can do that using the highlight postcode vignette. But it doesn't fix the problem that my eyes go into that plane and that bright area. So to do that, I need something else. The radial filter is available on the histogram panel, as you can see here in the development module, and I've got all these options available as I have with the grad and the adjustment brush. What I can do very quickly, and this is so much faster than using adjustment brush if that's how you've been doing it in the past, is just basically drawing an ellipse over the area that you'd like to maintain and manage, and then by dialing the exposure down, I'm going to darken the area around the horses. Not a lot, that's 2/3 of a stop, okay, just enough to dial that brightness down and give my viewer a scene which is much stronger. And you can see there, if I move over into the development panel modules, you can see there that my eyes are fixed on the cowboys and don't really move into that bright area anymore, because that is the bright area of the scene, and that's where the interest is. Of course, you can always feather this, and you can invert the mask, so you can look at the feather and see what the feathering does. You can see it blends in nicely, and the invert mask enables me to invert that mask at any point in time. So really great feature. So if you're using a lot of painting, adjustment brushes to dial areas down on portraits or landscapes, have a go with this. It's super cool. It makes it so much easier. Just keeping on the filter brush for a sec, on the game away there for a second. Just keeping on the grads and the radial filters for a second. Here's an image that I shot in the Lake District earlier this year, and you can see here that it's a bit dark and we need to fix it a little bit. So I go for my normal process of fixing the highlights, shadows, the white point and the black point, clarity to get this where it needs to be, and you see very quickly there you can make a really compelling picture. But I know that the sky was more moody than what that was, so I need to fix that. So I'm going to use a grad to fix that and pull a grad in from the outside, and I'm going to darken the exposure down to make it really dark. And then I'm going to use my hand tool just to move the area in over the mountains. But what happens is, and you can see if I turn on the mask, that the mask is now into the mountain, okay, which I don't want. I don't want to darken the edge of the mountain down. So I'm going to turn the brush on. When I turn the brush on, I'm going to automatically bring in the positive brush, which gives me more mask. If I use the Alt, I can turn off the mask, and I can paint away the masked areas and essentially refine my mask based upon the flow and density. Okay, these are going to give me control over how much mask is then laid down in those areas, and it gives me more control. Look at that. Very quickly, just fix that area up. Don't mind going to that branch for a second. Turn the mask off, and now you can see I've made a really big impact on that sky, but not touched any of the mountain below it. Okay, so back to my library module very quickly. I'm going to HDR. We know that a lot of photographers do like HDR, and people have been using Photoshop to do HDR for a while now, and it's great because it supports 32-bit HDR processing, so it gives you a much more natural looking image. But now what we've done in Lightroom 6 or Lightroom CC is actually now we can do all of that processing from within Lightroom itself. If we select the images from the slide, from the film strip, we can then pull that into now Photo Merge, and then we can pull that into HDR or panoramas. So this is HDR, so we're just going to pull HDR in. And what this will do now, and bearing in mind these are real live images, so they're using, they were taken from a Fuji X Pro 1, 3 frames, 1 stop under on each frame. So it's a real live file. It will create me an image which is about 250 megabytes, so it's quite large. But it's going to go in now, it's going to create me a HDR preview. The HDR preview is going to automatically align and tone the image for me, and will then transfer that data back into Lightroom. So it makes it super, super simple. You've also got deghosting like you have inside Photoshop as well, and you can do all of that information there. If I press the merge, what it does is it sends that to the background and creates a background task for me. So I'm not having the processing go against my normal kind of creative inspiration that I have when I'm working with a picture. So that's going to run nicely in the background. We'll come back to that in a second. But we also have the same for Panoramix. So I can then run Panoramix the same way. These three pictures are from a shoot in the Cumbermella last couple of years ago. And in Photo Merge, I'm just going to run Panorama. You can see the HDR is finishing, hasn't impacted on my panorama, and now we're going to pull that panorama in and create a panorama at the same time, then go back to the HDR just in presence of time. And you can see there that we've got a nice image, and we can do an auto crop to get rid of those areas that are automatically not part of the spherical panorama. So let's do that. That goes back, and let's just go to the HDR for a second and just go back to the HDR image. And you can see there that that image now looks like exactly as I shot tunnel view on that day when I was in Yosemite National Park. And you can see that Lightroom's gone in and made some adjustments for me. I can see that in the development module, whereas if I look in now into the highlights and shadows, these have already been plumbed in. So I can actually now go and manage them and modify them if I need to do. And I can put the clarity in to give me over a three-dimensional aspect to the picture. And then, of course, I'm going to use my F key. F key for full screen. That gives me a full display of that picture to my screen so I can see its full glory. And now with that clarity, it looks like that dimensional image. I can walk straight through those mountains and get a great view of El Capitan and Half Dome and the waterfall in tunnel view, which is pretty cool. And I love using HDR in Lightroom. It's super cool. Panoramic's nearly finished, and if I just select here, you can see that there's my panoramic done as well. So Lightroom does a really good job of making that stitch for me, but now I can continue. The beauty of all of this, of course, is that it creates me, especially with the HDR, creates me a 32-bit TIFF. So it means I can go in and manage all my highlights and shadows in 32-bit mode, and I'm not having to worry about the format of the file and the range of the tonality and all that kind of stuff. It does it for me. Okay, so of course, if you can do panoramics and if you can do HDRs, one of the most powerful things I think you can do, which is currently impossible without Lightroom, is doing something called a HDR panoramic. Now, a HDR panoramic is essentially taking multiple bracketed shots of the same scene multiple times throughout the panoramic. So in this scene, there's 5 defined areas in the final scene, shot 3 times each, one under, one over. So you can see here on my first image, I've got this one, which is an over, this one's an under, and this one's about the midpoint of the exposure. And I've already gone in and done a HDR merge of that HDR image. There's 3 images. Now, that creates me a single HDR for each set of 3. So therefore, I have 5 pictures to merge. So there's my first one, HDR. For my second one, I'm called HDR. They're all DNG. So the beauty of this, of course, is it's creating me a raw HDR image that I'm now going to convert into a raw panoramic. So while I'm doing this, the reason why all of this is so powerful is because, and the reason it's different from Photoshop, is that Lightroom creates me DNG files. A DNG file is a raw file, exactly the same as you shot with a Canon or a Nikon or a Leica or whatever it is. It's the same data set. So it's a raw file. Everything's in raw space. So my HDR is in raw space, my Pano's in raw space. So now I can actually go in and do my photo merge, and now I'm getting the 32-bit HDR and a 32-bit Pano. So it gives me much more tonal range than I could get before. So if before you were having to shoot grads when you're doing HDR to get that HDR panoramic, now you can actually shoot it in camera with bracketing, and then you go and build a panoramic in Lightroom using HDR Panoramics, will give you that final amazing scene. If I just merge all this together, it's just going to be in the background now just to do that, so it doesn't take too long. But while it's doing that panoramic, I'll just go into a couple of things. In Lightroom CC, you've got this menu now. If you click on this option over here, and in here you've got things like face detection, which I'll talk about in a second, and sync with Lightroom Mobile, which is turned on. Lightroom Mobile is actually turned on through the Preferences panel under Lightroom Mobile. You just sign in there with Adobe ID. If you haven't got Creative Cloud and you want to have a go, Color Confidence is going to talk about the bundle they're running a little bit later on. There's also a 30-day trial that you can try as well, and just trial this stuff out, because there is quite a lot of things in there that you can use. But as soon as you log in using Lightroom Mobile on the Preferences panel, you can then start publishing your content to your tablet device. And of course now we support the iOS and Android, as well as the iPad and the Android tablets as well. Okay, so that's almost finished. It's almost there. What I'm going to do is, while it's still running, I'm just going to add some content into my Lightroom Mobile. And for that, I'm just going to add a folder that I've been working with, one of my shoots that I was using, which is this one. And to get them into Lightroom Mobile is really, really simple. I'm going to create a collection. Okay, so collections are a way to virtually manage the pictures and to organize from different libraries, and the difference between collections and a library is that I can move content around in my collection. So I select everything in my folder that I have in my film strip, and using Apple A or Control A on a PC, and from there I'm going to go into a new collection, and I call it X-Rite Webinar. And you can see here that I have Synchronize with Lightroom Mobile turned on. So as I do that, it's going to synchronize that content with Lightroom Mobile in the Creative Cloud and automatically synchronize my previews down to my iPad, which we'll see in a second. Let's just go back to that panoramic very quickly. I know I'm roaming around here. I'm trying to use time in a very sensible way. Here's my image. Now, the great thing about Lightroom CC is this. So this image is huge. It's now 9,000 pixels on the long edge. It's really super fast as it comes in, bearing in mind it's 9,500 pixels. It's a RAW file, so I'm working with raw space. And with Lightroom CC, I get a nice fast preview as it comes up. So I'm now not working with lagginess. I'm working with really nice GPU accelerated data. I have 32-bit tonal range. So now I can go in and pull all the highlights out and shadow information, set my white point and black point, get that image looking amazing. And there you go. Very quickly, I get an amazing image with all that detail coming out into those clouds. Of course, I've got some smoke over here as well, and all that kind of stuff is going on. So you can see there that using Lightroom CC, Hdr Panoramics, you can get really effective, really amazing pictures with your Panoramix, and using full raw space and 32-bit tonal range to get all that data out in your image. Now we are pressed for time, so I'm going to very quickly just move across to Lightroom Mobile. I'm just going to move to my iPad very quickly. I've got 3 minutes to finish this before Andrei comes on. And what's happened is that Lightroom has pushed this to the Creative Cloud for me. I've not had to do anything. All I have to do is go into my iPad, log into the Creative Cloud on my iPad, into the same Adobe ID, and what should happen is, you see it's found the X-Rite webinar, it's also found the data and the content. So now I can access all my files, Lightroom, I can access all my files as I like them on my iPad. I can then work on those pictures in raw space on my iPad. So it brings across, this is the JPEG, but it brings across the same controls that I have inside Lightroom Desktop onto my iPad. Now, if you can see here at the top of the screen, you've got the load development version. This is because it's just loading the previews into my iPad. What I can do, though, is I might want to go offline with this. So if I click on the actual 3 buttons on the banner for the collection, I can enable for offline editing. It will tell me how much it needs, and notice that it's 372 megabytes of about 20 megabytes, sorry, 20 gigabytes, and it brings it right down by about 40% and downloads that information, which now means I can go offline. Now, just one more thing, I've almost done. Adobe Slate's a new app that you get with Creative Cloud, and with inside there, you can actually see and build stories and projects. So these pictures that I brought in just now from Lightroom were from a Fire Balloon Festival in Burma last year. And if I click on this project here, it will open the project up and give me an ability to start writing about my project. So now I can actually put text in, images in, and I can put other content, and I get a really lovely fluid flow over the data that I have inside my app. So I'm self-publishing content from Lightroom using Slate. You can see how I can put new pictures in. If I go to a set of pictures, because I've already done some work on this, if I go to some pictures in the grid, you can see it's a beautiful experience. If I go edit the grid now, you can see that I can log in to my Creative Cloud collection or Dropbox or Lightroom collection, and you can see I can go in and pick up my content that I had from Lightroom Mobile from the X-Rite webinar session that we've done today just now. So I can now start populating this data inside my grid, all in real time. Once I've finished that, I can then go out and view my work. So I finish that quickly, got 30 seconds to go. I can then go in, and if I want to publish that out, I can then publish this out. It will publish it out as HTML5. I can embed it into a blog. I can then visualize that on an iPad, on an iPhone, or any mobile device, or any screen that you may have, just using HTML5 as content. Okay, so it's a really great way of getting your content out there. So just minimize that quickly and go back to my presentation. So just before I hand over to Andrei, like I said before, you can reach out to me on Twitter at Richard Curtis, but you can also go to my blog at blogs.adobe.com/RichardCurtis, where I've got a whole lot of content around imaging, 3D printing, Photoshop, Lightroom, photography, all sorts of stuff. But you can also see a load of things that we have online from the Adobe corporate through our YouTube channels at Photoshop and Lightroom. So I'm going to hand over now to Andrei. I think that was 30 seconds over. Sorry about Andrei. But let me hand over to Andrei now, who's going to cover the color checker passport stuff and then move into the Q&A.
Okay, that's great, Richard. It was a really good presentation. Thank you very much for that. It was obviously so well explained that we don't have any questions at the moment. But feel free to any attendee that wishes to ask a question, just use your questions box, and we'll endeavour to answer that for you. Okay, so we're just going to change presenters and show our screen, and then I'll hand you on to Andrei.
All right, hi everyone. This is Andrei from X-Rite Photo. Thanks, Richard, for a very interesting presentation. So what I'm going to talk about is color checker passport within Lightroom. So basically, once you've shot your pictures, just make sure that you take a reference shot every time the ambient light changes. So here I've got a few shots. Basically, as you can see, the lighting is this is a mixed lighting scenario. So there is some artificial lights in front of her, and as well as there is a light coming in through the window. So and this creates this basically off color, wrong color balance. So what you can do before you actually can start editing images, you need to make sure that you install the software which comes with the color checker passport. So the software basically installs a plugin which will create a camera profile. So before I create the color profile, I'm just gonna select the color picker, and I've got 18% gray here. You can use any of these fields from the grayscale, but the 18% gray is basically the most traditional way to select color balance. So once I've corrected my white balance, I'm going to go into File, Export with Preset, and I've got Color Checker Passport preset here. Just going to click that. So now I'm going to enter the for example, camera name and the location name if you wish. So this was shot on a second, on a Nikon D3 webinar. So I'm going to save that. So the profile actually already exists because I've already created it. So I'm going to give it a different name just to show you how it works. So it's Nikon D3 X-Rite webinar. So what the software does, I'm gonna have an issue here. Anyway, what the plugin does is it basically scans the image and looks for the color checker passport target within the image, scans samples the colors, and creates a profile. So the profile actually goes to camera calibration profile, and I've got my Nikon D3 webinar profile here. So if I'm going to select that, just going to show you the selection before and after. So a second, let me just reset the image back because yeah. So before and after. So I've got an image before and after. An issue here for some reason. Adobe standard. Yes. So now you can see that you get a lot more separation in color once you've selected your profile. So especially Nikon camera bodies have got this issue in the blue channel. So the blue channel basically, as you can see, it's very dull in here. And once you've applied the color profile or created the color checker passport, you get a lot more separation. So if I'm gonna go back here, select the profile. So now I'm going to be using this image, color calibrated image, to edit the rest of the images. So I've got a few shots under the same lighting conditions. So I'm gonna select all of them and select my image which I've calibrated as my top image. I'm gonna click synchronize. So just make sure that white balance and calibration is selected. I'm going to click synchronize. So, and as you can see, the rest of the images from the session are now have been edited. So it's really a nice way to edit a number of images. I could have hundreds here, so especially if you're shooting a wedding or a portrait session, so that's really helpful. Now I'm going to ask if there are any questions. So let me check the webinar.
Okay, we have a few questions to answer. Richard, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, great. So we have a question from Paul Laurie. It says, Richard, why the option in Slate to let you go to Creative Cloud and Lightroom? Isn't Lightroom a subset of what is in the Creative Cloud?
That's a great question. It's a separate area. So when you subscribe to Creative Cloud, you get 2 GB of storage or 20 GB of storage, depending on which plan you're on. But the Lightroom mobile data is actually not stored within the Creative Cloud partition. So actually you get, as part of Lightroom Mobile, you get an unlimited amount of storage for free inside Lightroom Mobile as part of that plan. So you need to have a separate way into it. So the Creative Cloud does offer more assets and types of assets than what Lightroom does. So Lightroom gives you raw processing and raw data, and raw images, PSDs, TIFFs, etc. Where Creative Cloud actually gives you other things like vector graphics, gives you PSDs, it gives you swatches, it gives you shapes, it gives you brushes and colors. So they're actually kind of separated out, but we bring them together by having a Lightroom defined only and a Creative Cloud defined only. So that's why we do that.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Richard. We've got a question for Andrei from Simon Edwards. It basically says, where do you get hold of the palette she's holding, and is it a standard thing?
Right, so that's a good question. So basically, the chart which she's holding is the Color Checker Passport chart. It is a pretty standard thing, yes. It can be basically bought online, for example, from the Park cameras, which we've partnered for this webinar. So we will provide some pricing for that later.
At the end of the webinar, we'll take you to our sponsor Park Cameras and the offers they have on the moment, and you'll see one of them involves the Color Checker Passport, which you can buy as a standalone item, or you can purchase as part of a bundle with also an Adobe promotion that we're running. Okay, so we have another question for yourself, Richard. Could you please show the process of masking the mounting again? Unfortunately, Basil, we're not going to be able to go back over to Richard's screen, but what we will be doing is sending a recording out to all registrants over the next 2 days, which means that you will be able to watch this again and take the information from there, if that's okay.
It's also my blog as well, Dave.
Oh, okay, great. So we have a question from Robert McDonald. It says, in Lightroom, you use export with preset. Do you need to set up the preset or use default?
So I think basically it's a question about the Color Checker Passport again.
Okay.
Right. So to get this feature, basically what you need to do, you need to install the software which comes with the Color Checker Passport, which basically is free to use. So the software can be downloaded, the latest version, or it is also included on the CD. So once you've installed the software, you would need to restart Lightroom. So basically loads the plugin. And once you've restarted Lightroom, basically the preset is going to be there, and you will be able to use the Color Checker Passport profiling version. So.
Okay, so that looks like that wraps up our questions, which is great. I'd really like to say thank you to Richard from Adobe for joining us today. It's a fantastic presentation, and also to Andrei from X-Rite. We really hope you enjoyed the webinar. As we mentioned earlier, we have some great offers on at the moment with our sponsors Park Cameras, where they are doing a 10% discount for 10 days only to anybody that wishes to take advantage of these offers. They have specific codes set up purely for this webinar. So if you are interested in any of the offers I'm going to list, then I think now is a great time to purchase these. We will also be providing links to these offers at on the email that will follow over the next 2 days. So if I go through these offers, so we have an i1 Display Pro calibrator, which includes an option of an Adobe Creative Cloud Photography year subscription, which is Adobe Photoshop and Lightroom for 1 year, and that is 15% off that. So you would go to Park Cameras, search X-Rite, find that offer, and enter the discount code, which is CC1 save 10 at the checkout. We also have the i1 display with the Color Checker Passport bundle that Andrei demonstrated. This also comes with the option of 15% off the Adobe Creative Cloud Photography Suite. We also have a Color Monkey Photo, which is a high-end calibrator, which will also calibrate your print. And that includes an Adobe Creative Cloud Photography 1 year subscription. So that's a great offer, as the Creative Cloud Photography subscription is worth over £100. So again, you would go to Park Cameras, search X-Rite, and enter the discount code on our screen. For very high-end calibrating, we have a option of an i1 Photo Pro 2, which includes the Adobe Creative Cloud Photography 1-year subscription. Again, that's from Park Cameras.
By putting this on a single tenant server, which means that their data is isolated and encrypted. So it's not
Okay, so thank you everyone for joining, and thanks very much for your time. We hope to see you for the next one, and thanks again to our presenters, Andrei and Richard. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave. Thanks, everyone.